Many people assume that recovering from depression is a purely uplifting experience, that once your energy returns and the clouds begin to lift, you'll feel joy, relief, and excitement to move forward. And for some, that's true at first. But for others, something entirely different shows up. Instead of relief, they feel guilt. Instead of clarity, they feel regret. A sinking, sometimes overwhelming awareness. Look at everything I lost. Where was I for all that time? I wasted so much of my life. This is not just sadness, it's a sharp, reflective pain, a delayed grief. And many people have no idea where it came from because they didn't feel it during the depression itself. It seems to appear only after the depression begins to fade. Why? To understand this unexpected emotional shift, we need to look at what actually happens inside the brain during a depressive episode. Depression shuts down reflection. When you're in a depressive state, your brain isn't functioning at full capacity. In fact, certain areas of your brain become significantly less active, especially those responsible for long-term thinking, decision-making, and self-evaluation. Most notably, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that helps you assess your life, reflect on your values, and project into the future, becomes impaired. This means that during depression, your internal sense of time collapses. You are not thinking months ahead. You are barely thinking beyond the next hour. The world becomes narrowed to a single focus: survival. Simple tasks like brushing your teeth, replying to a message, or getting out of bed can become Herculean efforts. These seemingly basic actions consume most, if not all, of your mental and emotional bandwidth. There is no energy left to think about goals, relationships, or consequences. And this is why guilt doesn't show up at that time. Because the system required to generate guilt, your ability to reflect, analyze, and judge yourself, is temporarily offline. The brain, in many ways, is protecting you, not by helping you thrive, but by helping you minimize further emotional pain. It focuses only on what's immediately necessary. Anything else becomes blurred, distant, or irrelevant. When function returns, so does awareness. But then something begins to shift. Slowly, you begin to recover. Maybe you start sleeping better, eating again, making plans, returning to work or social life. And along with that external change, something inside begins to reawaken. Your prefrontal cortex starts coming back online. And with it comes the capacity to look backward, to remember, to reflect, to see the full picture you couldn't see before. And for many people, what they see devastates them. They remember the people they hurt, the deadlines they missed, the responsibilities they dropped, and the opportunities that passed them by. They remember how disconnected, withdrawn, and unavailable they were to others and to themselves. What was once blurred and foggy becomes painfully clear. Guilt attached to recovery. Here's the paradox. The fact that you're feeling guilty doesn't mean you've gotten worse. It actually means your brain is healing. Your awareness is increasing. Your emotional system is recalibrating. You're re-entering a state where you care again, where you notice, where you want to take responsibility. This is difficult to accept because guilt feels like regression. But it's actually a form of forward movement. It's your mind re-engaging with reality and with your past. Of course, that doesn't make it easier. In fact, for many people, this new awareness feels worse than the depression itself. The double bind. You see it now, but you couldn't then. This is where a hidden trap begins. Once you're out of the depressive fog and your brain is functioning better, you look back at your past behavior and think, how could I have done that? Why didn't I try harder? I should have known better. But here's the problem. You're evaluating the past through your present lens. You're using the clarity you have now to judge a time when you didn't have it. Psychologists call this retrospective distortion. It happens when a person in a healthier state looks back at themselves in an unhealthy state and assumes that the same mental tools were available. But they weren't. Let's make this clear. The version of you who was depressed did not have the insight, motivation, or cognitive strength that you do now. That person was functioning with a different brain, one that was overwhelmed, chemically imbalanced, and unable to process time, reward, or risk in a typical way. So yes, looking back now, your choices may seem obviously wrong, but they weren't obvious then. You didn't have the full set of tools. You didn't have the same vision. You didn't have the same brain. You're comparing yourself to an ideal that never existed. Most people in recovery compare themselves to a version of who they think they should have been, an ideal self, a healthier version of themselves that, in theory, could have done better. But here's the truth. That version never existed. Not at that time. You didn't fail because you were lazy or careless or unmotivated. You struggled because your capacity was limited. Your nervous system was shutting down. Your motivation circuits were dimmed. Your memory was foggy. Your sense of time and reward was distorted. And yet, now that you're more functional, you forget all that. You look back and judge your past self as if they were healthy, stable, and fully informed, which they weren't. This creates a false narrative. And this is how a second layer of guilt forms. At first, the guilt is about what happened, what you didn't do, what fell apart. But soon, it becomes about who you think you are. You start telling yourself, I ruined my own life. I let this happen. It's all my fault. This belief isn't just painful, it's inaccurate because it ignores the core principle that agency depends on capacity. You cannot make full, empowered choices when your brain is impaired. You can't hold yourself accountable for decisions you made under duress, in confusion, or with incomplete cognitive access. Yes, you are responsible for your healing, but no, you are not to blame for how your brain functioned while you were in survival mode. Depression isn't just a mood, it's a cognitive shift. When people think of depression, they often imagine sadness, but the real story is deeper. Depression is a biological shift. It alters the way your brain processes time, emotion, memory, and meaning. Your reward system becomes dulled. Your threat system becomes hyperactive. Your ability to process feedback slows down. Your capacity to imagine a better future shuts down. So you stop reaching, you stop responding, you retreat. Not because you're weak, but because your system has been forced into an emergency freeze. And in that state, even small decisions feel massive. Every option feels wrong. Every action feels pointless. So the question isn't, why didn't I do more? The question is, how did I survive at all? Reframing guilt as a signal of return. What if guilt wasn't a punishment but a signpost? A marker that you've come back online, that your system is healing, that you've reconnected with your values, your relationships, and your vision. Yes, it hurts, but it hurts because you're caring again. That pain isn't shame. It's evidence of meaning. You're no longer numb. You're no longer flatlining, you're feeling. And that matters. So instead of using guilt to punish your past self, what if you used it to honor them? What if you looked at your old wounds, not with judgment, but with awe? Because that version of you kept breathing, kept trying, and made it through. And now you have a chance to begin again. Let's imagine this moment. You're starting to feel better. You're functioning again. Maybe not fully healed, but far enough along the recovery curve that your mind begins to feel sharper. Your thoughts are more organized. You're remembering things. You're engaging again with life, with people, with yourself. And then it hits you. Memories come rushing in like a flood. Memories of everything you didn't do. Everything that slipped through your fingers, the people you pushed away, the opportunities you ignored, the jobs you quit, the texts you never answered, the birthdays you missed, the basic responsibilities you abandoned. You remember moments of lying in bed all day, staring at the wall. You remember being asked if you were okay and saying, "I'm fine," because you couldn't explain what you felt. You remember being emotionally absent from relationships, even the ones that mattered most. And now that your mind is clearer, it all feels inexcusable. A part of you starts whispering, "I should have done more. I wasted so much time. It was all my fault." This guilt doesn't just visit, it moves in. It sets up camp in your chest. And you start to wonder if maybe, deep down, you ruined your own life. You're remembering the past with the wrong brain. Before you accept that narrative, let's pause. Because what's happening here is not simple memory. It's distorted recall. What you're experiencing is what psychologists call retrospective distortion. Here's how it works. Your brain today is not the same brain you had during depression. Your current self has access to clarity, motivation, executive function, and future-oriented thinking. But your past self didn't. And yet, when you look back now, your current brain assumes your past brain had all the same capacities. It says, "Why didn't I make that call? How could I have skipped that interview? What kind of person does that?" But this is like judging someone's swimming ability after pulling them out of the ocean during a storm. It ignores the conditions, it assumes equal footing, and it paints a false picture of reality. Because the truth is, you didn't have the same internal tools then as you do now. Depression warps function, not just feeling. Depression isn't just sadness. It's a neurological alteration that affects cognition, motivation, perception, and memory. When you're depressed, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, judgment, and self-awareness, goes offline or underactivated. Your reward system, dopamine-based, becomes hypoactive, meaning nothing feels worth doing, even things you once loved. Your ability to process consequences or imagine positive outcomes collapses. Your sense of time distorts. The future feels abstract. The past feels distant. The present becomes all-consuming. So when you think back and say, "I should have done something different," what you're really doing is projecting your current clarity onto a past version of yourself who didn't have access to it. It's not a fair comparison. And more importantly, it's not the truth. You had less capacity than you remember. Think about this. If someone you loved had been in the state you were in, would you expect them to thrive? Would you say you should have tried harder? Or would you say you were barely holding on and that's okay? Most people extend more compassion to strangers than they do to their past selves. But healing means applying the same grace to yourself that you would offer others. Because when you remember your depressive period from a higher functioning state, you're prone to misattribute impairment as personal failure. And that leads to a deeper, darker kind of guilt. Not just guilt over what happened, but the belief that you chose it, that you caused the damage, that you deserve the consequences. This becomes self-condemnation, not accountability. And this is where guilt mutates into something far more painful: self-condemnation. At first, guilt might say, I wish I had done things differently. But soon it turns into, there's something wrong with me. And that belief lingers, because guilt has now fused with identity. You don't just feel regret, you feel defined by it. You wear it like a badge of shame. You use it to explain who you are, what you've become, and why you no longer deserve the things you once wanted. But this belief system is based on a false assumption that you were fully in control the entire time. You weren't. Your brain was operating with reduced capacity. Your system was in shutdown. You weren't lazy, you were overwhelmed, you weren't selfish, you were cognitively impaired, you weren't choosing pain, you were surviving it. Agency requires resources. Let's be clear, you are responsible for your recovery. But you are not morally to blame for what happened during your depression. Why? Because agency requires access. You can't expect a person to act on options they cannot see. You can't demand decisions from someone whose mind is operating in freeze or fog. It's not a matter of character, it's a matter of capacity. So when you look back and say, I should have done better, you're overlooking a simple truth. You did the best you could with what you had at the time. The guilt you feel now is a sign of your growth. Ironically, the very guilt that's hurting you is also evidence that you're healing. You're only able to reflect this deeply because your mind has recovered enough to hold complexity. You're seeing the bigger picture now. You're feeling again. You're remembering. You're engaging with your values. That's not regression. That's progress. But the danger lies in turning that awareness against yourself. Instead of using your new perspective to grow, you use it to punish. That's not recovery. That's a trap. Guilt is not the same as growth. Here's a psychological truth we often forget. Guilt growth. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean you're learning. In fact, guilt often keeps you stuck. It creates a loop. You remember something painful, you judge yourself, you withdraw, you avoid healing. The guilt persists, and round it goes. Real growth requires more than guilt. It requires context, compassion, curiosity, integration. It means asking, what was happening inside me at that time? What did I need that I didn't have? What does this part of my story say about my resilience, not just my mistakes? You don't have to rewrite the past. You just have to understand it. You don't need to justify everything that happened. You don't need to turn your pain into a redemption story. You just need to remember this. The version of you who lived through that darkness didn't give up. They may have frozen. They may have disappeared. They may have lost all sense of direction, but they made it through. And if you can honor that truth, you can begin to release the guilt. Not because nothing went wrong, but because now you know better. Not just what to do differently next time, but how to treat yourself differently too. By now, you've started to realize something crucial. The guilt you felt after depression wasn't madness. It was memory reactivating. You've begun separating capacity from responsibility. You've started recognizing the difference between real accountability and distorted self-blame. But just as you begin stepping away from guilt, another trap emerges, quieter, trickier, and socially rewarded. Overcompensation. It goes something like this. Okay, maybe I couldn't help what happened back then, but now I need to make up for everything I lost. I have to catch up. I have to work harder. I have to prove that I'm okay now. And on the surface, this doesn't sound bad. It sounds like progress. It looks like motivation. You're setting goals, creating routines, rebuilding relationships. You're back in the game. But what most people don't realize is this. Overcompensation is still guilt, just wearing a productivity mask. When guilt disguises itself as drive in modern culture, we often confuse urgency with healing. We believe that doing more means we've overcome something, that productivity proves recovery, that achievement erases failure. But when your efforts are rooted in unprocessed guilt, you're not moving forward. You're trying to erase the past. You tell yourself, if I can just accomplish enough, I'll feel better. If I fix everything I broke, I'll forgive myself. If I finally succeed, I can leave it all behind. This mindset may give you short bursts of energy, but it's not sustainable. Because guilt-driven productivity isn't clarity. It's panic in disguise. The psychology of overcompensation. Let's break it down. Overcompensation happens when your brain tries to balance emotional debt by overloading the present. It tells you, you lost time, so now you must accelerate. You caused harm, so now you must overserve. You missed milestones, so now you must overachieve. This might lead you to take on too many goals at once, work excessively without rest. Force social connections you're not ready for. Set timelines that leave no room for error. Constantly monitor your progress as if you're racing a clock, and from the outside, people might praise you. You're doing amazing. You've bounced back so fast. I'm so impressed with your discipline. But inside, something feels hollow. Because you're not rebuilding, you're chasing. You're not creating with joy. You're compensating out of fear. The burnout loop, when effort becomes exhaustion. Here's how the overcompensation cycle unfolds. Initial surge, you feel motivated, you make plans, you commit to change. Unrealistic pressure. You try to fix everything at once. Career, health, relationships, mental strain, you push past your limits, ignoring emotional signals. Setbacks, you hit roadblocks or experience fatigue. Progress slows, internal collapse. You blame yourself again. I knew I couldn't do this. Emotional crash, you burn out, you isolate, you relapse into shame. Reactivated guilt? The guilt returns and you promise to try harder. And the cycle restarts. This is repetitive overcompensation, when your desire to make up for the past becomes a new source of harm. You're not recovering, you're punishing yourself through performance. Why this approach fails? The problem with guilt-driven recovery is that it's rooted in the belief that your life only has value if you can undo what happened. You see yourself as being in debt to the world, to your loved ones, to your own potential, and so every step forward is treated as repayment. But here's the truth. You can't repay the past. There's no amount of work, love, achievement, or self-sacrifice that can erase what already happened. You can only integrate it. Trying to rebuild your life without grieving what was lost is like renovating a house without clearing out the damage. You keep layering new walls over broken ones, and they eventually collapse under pressure. The myth of catching up. Another dangerous belief that fuels overcompensation is the idea that you've fallen behind. You look at your peers, you scroll through social media, you compare timelines, achievements, relationships, and you tell yourself, I need to catch up. I need to get where I should have been by now. But who defines should? The myth of catching up is a trap. It assumes that there is a fixed timeline for healing, that life progresses linearly, that others have it all figured out. That worth comes from synchronization, not authenticity. But healing doesn't follow a schedule. Your path is not a race, and your pace is not a problem. When you chase time as if it owes you something, you stay locked in the past. Trauma doesn't respond to deadlines. Here's what we forget. Trauma and urgency don't mix. When you push your system into overdrive to compensate, your nervous system doesn't feel restored, it feels threatened. It's still operating under stress. The result? Poor emotional regulation, hypervigilance difficulty. Resting, fear of stillness, panic during pauses. Pressure to always be doing. You may look productive on the outside, but internally, you're stuck in fight or flight, still running from the pain you never paused to process. Achievement doesn't equal integration. Many people try to bypass grief by replacing it with achievement. They think, if I build a better life fast enough, I won't have to feel the loss. But unprocessed grief doesn't disappear. It just waits, and it usually resurfaces. When you slow down, when your project ends, when you're alone, when success doesn't feel like enough because no external outcome can resolve an internal rupture. Grief is not a failure to fix, it's a capacity to feel. From overcompensation to integration. So how do you shift out of the trap? You begin by letting go of the race. You stop trying to redeem yourself through results. You stop trying to outperform your pain. You stop trying to reconstruct a life that never existed. Instead, you ask, what feels honest right now? What pace feels sustainable? What do I need, not to prove, but to live? You allow yourself to build slowly, to feel deeply, to create with care, to pause when needed. You allow space for your humanity, not just your productivity. Recovery is reinvestment, not erasure. Here's the most important shift. Healing isn't about deleting the past, it's about reinvesting in the present. You don't owe the world a comeback story. You don't need to impress anyone with your bounce-back speed. You don't need to punish yourself by doing everything right now. You need space. You need grace. You need time. And you deserve a life that honors your actual self, not a performance to cover your old one. The exit from the loop. To leave the cycle of overcompensation, you must acknowledge the urge to prove yourself. Notice it. Don't shame it, but don't follow it. Slow your pace intentionally. Resist urgency. Make space for reflection. Reclaim your narrative. You are not a redemption project. You are a human being. Honor your capacity. You are not behind. You are in progress on a timeline of your own making. Practice presence. Let go of fixing what's gone. Begin tending to what's here. Because when you stop treating healing as a mission to compensate, you create space for something better. A life that includes your past without being trapped by it. You've walked through guilt. You've seen how memory can lie. You've untangled the myth that productivity can fix the past. But there's still one emotion left. One that most people avoid, but without which no true healing can happen. Grief. Grief is the emotion beneath the guilt. What if your guilt isn't actually guilt? What if it's grief, disguised? Because here's the thing, guilt gives us a sense of control. It says, I caused this. I could have done something differently. And even though that hurts, it also makes us feel powerful, like we still have a say in the story. But grief doesn't offer that. Grief says, this happened, and I can't undo it. It's not about blame, it's about loss. Grief isn't tidy, it's not logical. It doesn't give you a job to do or a plan to follow. It just asks you to feel what's been lost without fixing it. What are you actually mourning? You're not just mourning missed opportunities, you're mourning The version of yourself that never got to grow. The relationships that faded while you were gone. The joy you didn't feel. The person you couldn't be. For yourself or for others. The days, months, even years that vanished into fog. You're grieving the time depression stole. The energy you couldn't access. The love you couldn't express. The lightness you forgot how to feel. And this mourning is valid. It's not melodramatic. It's not excessive. It's a necessary act of integration. Because you can't make peace with something you've never let yourself fully feel. Guilt keeps you in the past. Grief lets you move through it. Guilt locks you into self-punishment. It repeats the same story. I messed up. I ruined it. I don't deserve to move forward. But grief opens a new path. This is what I lost. This is what I lived through. And now I carry it with me. You're not erasing the past. You're accepting it. You're saying, yes, I was absent. Yes, I hurt people. Yes, I missed so much. But instead of turning those truths into verdicts, you're turning them into witnessing. Not judgment, not justification, just presence. Compassion means including the you who couldn't function. Imagine this. A younger version of you, exhausted, foggy, barely able to hold themselves up, is sitting in front of you. What would you say? Would you scream, you should have done better? Would you say, you failed everyone? Would you punish them? Or would you kneel beside them, hold their hand and whisper, you didn't deserve to go through that alone? Because that version of you didn't need shame. They needed support. They needed space. They needed understanding that never came, and now you get to offer it. You get to give yourself the compassion you were missing. This is grief, not guilt, not denial, just human recognition. Guilt pretends to repair, but it can't. So many people cling to guilt because they believe it's a form of penance. They think, if I suffer enough, I'll redeem the damage. If I stay ashamed, I'll prove I care. If I don't forgive myself, I won't forget the harm I caused. But here's the truth. Guilt doesn't fix anything. It doesn't rebuild relationships. It doesn't restore time. It doesn't teach you how to live differently. At some point, it just becomes stuck pain. Grief, on the other hand, allows for release. It says, this matters deeply, but I no longer need to be buried by it. Grief lets you hold your history without being held back by it. Letting go isn't erasure, it's honor. You might feel afraid that if you stop feeling guilty, it means you don't care, that you're letting yourself off the hook. But here's what letting go really means. It means you've learned the lesson. It means you're no longer defining yourself by your lowest chapter. It means you're honoring your experience, not trying to reverse it. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without collapse. It means integrating, not deleting. And this is where true peace begins, from self-punishment to self-reclamation. To truly move forward, you don't need to make up for lost time. You need to reinvest in the time you still have. You don't need to outrun your past. You need to bring it with you as part of you. You don't need to fix the story, you need to finish it. And you can only do that from a place of wholeness, not war. Integration, the final step in recovery. Integration means this. Your story includes the depressive years but isn't defined by them. Your past mistakes are acknowledged, but no longer weaponized. Your losses are real, but they don't mean you've failed. Your identity is not fractured, but reformed, with truth at the center. You're not trying to be your old self. You're not trying to create a version of you that never broke. You're becoming someone new, someone who holds the entire spectrum of who you've been. This is the heart of healing. You become coherent again. In psychology, there's a concept called self-coherence. It's the ability to hold your life story with clarity, honesty, and compassion. Most people who live through depression lose this coherence. They split their identity into before and after. They try to erase what happened, pretend it wasn't real. But the real recovery begins when you say, this happened, it changed me, and I still get to choose how I live now. When you stop organizing your life around who you were supposed to be and start creating from who you actually are, that's coherence. That's wholeness. From grief to grace. Grief is not the end of the healing journey, it's the gateway to transformation. Because only after you've felt the depth of what you lost can you begin to see the truth of what you still have. You're alive. You're aware. You're open. That means you can connect. You can create. You can choose again. Grief empties you, but only so that you can be filled with truth instead of illusion, presence instead of projection, and love instead of punishment. What comes after guilt? What comes after guilt is acceptance. What comes after shame is self-repair. What comes after avoidance is re-engagement. And what comes after grief is freedom. Not the freedom to forget, but the freedom to live alongside what happened and no longer be imprisoned by it. So if you're still holding on to guilt because it feels like the only thing tying you to your integrity, let this be your reminder. Sincerity is not measured by suffering. It's measured by how you show up now, how you choose differently, how you live with honesty even when it's uncomfortable. You don't need to earn your right to heal. You've already survived enough. Now it's time to become whole again. final invitation. If any part of this journey spoke to something you've carried silently, know this. You are not alone. You are not broken. And your pain is not meaningless. You are not the story you told yourself in the dark. You are the person who emerged. Grief is not your weakness. It's your witness. So let yourself grieve. And then let yourself begin again.